It was a beautiful day. A glistening sun smiled down upon a disheveled man, clad with graying brown hair and dull blue eyes. He opened his suitcase one last time to ensure that all of his personal belongings were tucked away neatly. Nearly everything had been left behind in that decrepit, single-story cabin, with only a feeble fireplace and decaying walls to keep him company during the long winter nights and hot summer days. Despite this, he kept himself busy, immersing himself in hundreds of books each year. Never once did he abandon a book for any reason. Start to finish, he would read, no matter how boring or lengthy. The lector, they called him, as he walked past the village streets to take out yet another book. It was a humble life, yet it was a good life that he decided that he would not trade for another. Then the storm hit. Only last night, as he neared the end of a book he had been working on for weeks, a torrent of rain and thunder had struck and left his house in shambles. Unflinchingly, he had gathered what remained of his books and packed it all into a leather suitcase that he now carefully gripped at his side as he viewed the cheap carriage he had hired clotting towards him. Without family, relatives, or real friends, he decided he would journey far, far away. The carriage would take him to Santel, the port city, where he would then board a ship to the mysterious western continent. The door of the carriage opened, a gateway to an unknown realm, and shut with a loud creak. Then the carriage started moving, and with it, the life he had held on to so dearly. 4 months later, he found himself outside of a dark, walled kingdom. There was nothing to welcome him, nor anybody to greet him. All he saw were the walls and a poorly maintained road leading into the city. The traveler followed the path until he made it through the looming walls of the city. Walking aimlessly through the kingdom, the traveler saw ramshackle cottages and people living in shacks that seemed to be held up by no more than a couple of sticks. He saw a poor man begging by the side of the street. The lector's heart dropped, seeing how his hands were empty.
Not one person had the kindness to give him a single coin.
The lector was by no means a rich man, yet he walked towards the man and dropped several gold coins in his hands, nearly cleaving his small bag of money in half. The man looked up, fatigue being replaced with a glimmer of hope as he met the lector's eyes. The poor fellow cried,
I have never known kindness like yours, stranger. I have nothing but gratitude.
The lector, having seen and read many things in his life, said,
There's no trouble. At a young age, I learned from stories that I had read that one must always be good to strangers, and everyone deserves kindness.
The beggar furrowed his brow, confused. The lector continued,
I've always thought that books can give powerful insight into how to treat others and how to live your life. And after all, books are written by people who have lived through and experienced quite a bit. The stranger speaks weirdly. What is a book?
Now it was the lector's turn to give a confused look.
What is a book?
He restated, near mockingly.
Why, it's only the finest invention known to man. They are the physical manifestations of experience and thought. Everything that is known and can be taught can be found in a book. How do you teach your children critical life lessons without them?
The poor man simply shrugged, and that was the end of their conversation. That night, as the lector lay on a blanket in a quiet corner of the city, his brain was wild with pity for the state of the kingdom and contempt for the clear lack of respect they had towards each other. His thoughts turned to the confusion expressed by the beggar when he had brought up books. He was still dumbfounded.
How would it have been possible to build a society without a way to teach people of the lessons learned long ago? Did they really expect people to learn everything themselves?
He put the book he was reading back in his bag, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. The lector woke up with a start as he heard shouting coming from a distance. He roused himself and started towards the noise. Entering the clearing, he saw 4 people. There were 3 men hunched over and screaming at the 4th man, who held wide eyes and a pained expression. No, not a man, he realized. A boy, no older than 7 years old. Being a man of good conscience, the lector could not simply let a child stand up to the others alone. He took a few steps towards the altercation. The men noticed him barging up to them, and upon beholding his furious expression, they swiftly fled the scene. The boy looked at the lector with fear in his eyes. The lector asked,
"Young boy, is everything alright?"
The boy only whimpered in response.
"I don't mean to hurt you. I'm simply concerned about your well-being."
The boy whispered.
"No, it's not that. No one's ever stood up for me before."
The lector replied,
"Why ever not? As a young child, I learned to always stand up for others in need, regardless of if you know them. Though this piece of knowledge has gotten me into a few fights, it's helped me make the world a better place."
The boy questioned,
Where did you learn such a thing?"
In a wonderful novel I read. Although, my experiences in this kingdom would tell me you don't quite know what a novel is, do you?
The boy shrugged in response. The lector looked around him at the dingy buildings. What he saw was a society with no books or literature from which to learn from.
Everyone here has never read of the struggles of those who lived long ago. They take no lessons from the stories of great heroes doing great deeds.
All of a sudden, a bright fanfare was heard around the corner. A man wearing robes and a golden crown walked around the corner and spotted the lector, clearly out of fashion with his neat gray tunic and cloth trousers. A crowd started gathering around the king with interest, being shoved back by his guards. The lector could feel everyone's stares trained on them like a pack of wolves on fresh meat.
"You look like a foreigner. What are you doing here in my kingdom?" "I'm simply passing through, experiencing this unique city." "Why would anyone possibly want to do that?" "To learn more about your people, so I can better understand them." "Who needs to understand people when you can just use them?" Let me tell you a story.
The king paused, furrowing his brow like the beggar on the street the day before. But he paused with interest, so the lector continued.
I once read a book about a king who ruled a city much like yours. He walked through the streets of his kingdom, talking to his people, trying to get a better understanding of them and their struggles. This kingdom flourished and grew to be a thriving empire. However, once the king died, his son took his place. He, unlike his father, stayed in his palace with other rich people. Before long, the people rebelled, and the empire crumbled to nothing. "What is this book you speak of? Could have you hung for such traitorous language. Surely it cannot be a sign of what is to come for us." "Surely it can."
The lector pressed, unwavering despite the threat looming in the air.
A good book is like a time machine, a teleporter, a mind reader, all combined into one. But above all, a book is a way to teach people many, many things. How can such advanced technology exist? That's the beauty of literature. It is one of mankind's simplest inventions, yet still the most revolutionary. Literature is the collection of human experiences. When an author writes something down, they are imprinting part of their life and wisdom onto the paper. Those who then read their writing inherit this wisdom. A good society is made up of people who have learned many important lessons, not necessarily for themselves, lessons on how to be generous to others, to help others in need, to stand up for what you believe in. Without literature, the insight of thousands of people who've lived through many hardships would be lost. For example, in the Odyssey, when Odysseus says, "Would that I were still young and strong as I was in those days, for then some one of you swineherds would give me a cloak, both out of goodwill and for the respect due to a brave soldier. But now, people look down upon me because my clothes are shabby." The lesson hidden in these words is a lesson on how to treat other people correctly. Without literature, this lesson cannot be learned.
The king seemed to ponder his words. Then he realized that he was, in fact, talking to a foreigner. He scoffed.
What do you know about hardships? For all I know, you've lived a life of pampering, and you've come here to bring only curses to our kingdom, like that beggar, always groveling for scraps.
The king sneered.
Leave my presence before I call my guards. You wasted enough of my time.
The king turned to leave, sweeping his robe in his face as his personal bodyguards swept in from the sides, flanking him. They raised their spears as the lector took a step forward. The lector sighed.
My house was destroyed by a storm. For the past 2 months, I've been traveling across the seas in the cellar of a cargo ship with conditions unfit for anyone. I mean you no harm, and I will not do you any harm, but you must understand. You know the beggar you mentioned?
The lector pleaded. The king turned around, interest replacing the cocky grin on his face only moments before.
I gave him nearly the rest of my meager wealth.
The crowd that had formed around the king gasped.
I did not expect anything in return, yet the smile on his face.
He paused, turning his head to the onlookers.
The smile, Your Majesty. Tell me where you see a smile in this crowd, and then tell me who actually brought curses to this crumbling kingdom.
The crowd let out another gasp, knowing what the king would do against even the slightest of insults. The tension reverberated through the air, a dense, unrelenting fog in the midst of a mob. The lector didn't even flinch as the king shoved his guards aside and met the lector's stare, cold and unwavering. Then after another eternity had passed, he let out a sigh.
You may be insolent, but you are right.
He mumbled.
Where shall I start? From my experience, the best lesson is taught through a good novel. Though no one of your kingdom has recorded their stories, it can be started now. Literature is a means by which to spread ideas and experiences. Have your citizens write down important things that they go through or think of. The citizens of the city will be able to learn from each other, invent a new society for your people, one based on compassion and understanding. There's no better way to do this than to give your people a way to learn about the lives of others and have empathy for them. Reading about the struggle that others have gone through and reading about them fighting for what they believe is important can give them a sense of inspiration as well as insight that they can use in their own lives. If it hadn't been for the lessons I've learned from books and stories, I wouldn't be half as good of a man as I am today. But we don't know how to write. We never found it necessary to record such things. But record such things you must. The well-being of future generations depends on it. What you write now could still be read millennia into the future. Students of literature will read your writings and the stories you tell to learn not only how life is now, but how that can parallel with what life will be like then. It is necessary to develop a system of writing so that generations of your posterity may benefit from the lessons that you struggle to learn now. If you write about living through a war, then they will learn about surviving through hardship. If you tell a story of a great hero fighting for others, they will be inspired to do the same. Create a world of kindness, not hate, of prosperity and not disaster. Write for the future, so that they, no, we may have the wisdom of 1,000 years.
A cheer arose from the crowd, and the little boy who the lector had saved earlier ran up to him.
Mister, I think today would be a good story to write about. Call me the lector.
He smiled, bending down to clasp his hand in his.
Yes, we have a very good story to start with. For the better half of the next decade, the lector taught children, adults, and the elderly alike what he knew of literature. He started with oral tradition, gathering thousands of people whose eyes had been opened to the marvels of worlds of fantasy, history, and science. Crowds gasped as he sent sudden plot twists against beloved characters. For the first time in centuries, there was much laughing and smiling in the kingdom, for the people now knew the true power of a story. Then he taught the art of writing, and translated all of his knowledge on literature into written language, so that the people of this gloomy society would finally experience the magic of story writing. And as promised, it changed the city. Guards were stationed at the front gate, not to protect the city from travelers, but to welcome them with gifts and warm greetings. Travel between the western continent and Centel increased tenfold. Stories were told, and many new ideas were born.
One day, as the 10-year anniversary of his arrival approached, he left the house that the king had thoughtfully rewarded him with, and his jaw sank to his chest. Flowers and wreaths lined the city streets, with shining dresses and tunics flashing reds, whites, and yellows under the light of the sun. But it wasn't the celebration that caught his eye. It was the large stone statue that now stood proudly in the center of the city square, towering high above the tallest buildings. The right hand of the statue was relaxed at its side, but the left hand held a rectangular object. A book, he thought, his eyes widening. Then he looked into the statue's eyes, admiring the careful craftsmanship and painstaking detail of it all. His knees weakened as his eyes, brimming with tears, met his own pair of eyes on the carved stone monolith in front of him. As a crowd formed around him, cheering and chanting his name, he recognized a handsome young man, dressed beautifully in a robe and trousers. He let out a sob as he recognized the boy, smiling back at him for what seemed to be the first time in an eternity. His knees finally gave out under him as he saw a particular man in robes and a golden crown wasting no time rushing over him and pulling him into a tight embrace, despite the protests of his guards. The crowd only cheered louder.
Books like Internment can teach us important lessons. For example, when the author writes, a compass doesn't tell you where you are, and it doesn't tell you where you have to go. It can only point you in a direction. It's up to you to always find your true north. This is an example of a good lesson learned from reading, which can impact readers in a multitude of ways.
Literature has the power to do so much good in the world. Books can guide us through life and teach us all that we need to know. So all you need to do is read and spread the ideas you learn.